Well, hello everyone. My name is Andrea McAvoy, and I am the Director of Client Services at the Office of Intellectual Property and Industry Research Alliances at UC Berkeley. Thank you for attending today's SBIR STTR funding, Small Business Research Subcontracts session. It's a mouthful. Other webinar topics offered by IPRA throughout the spring and fall include intellectual property, patenting and licensing, as well as industry research funding. You also may be interested in free webinars that are offered by Berkeley's Research Data Portal if you create or manage research data in your work. The next one is going to be hosted by IPRA's Industry Alliances Office, and it's going to be about how to read your data use agreement on Thursday, April 3rd. More information will be put in the chat along with the registration link. I think, Deborah, if you can do that for the portal one. Thank you. Today we'll be hearing from Kate Lewis, who is the Associate Director of IPRA's Industry Alliances Office. Also joining us is Lale Shayeste, who's our Director of Intellectual Property and Administration, and Deborah Summers, who is our Director of Marketing and Communications. Deborah will be putting links in the chat throughout the webinar, and you'll receive an email with many of them afterwards. We are recording today's webinar. Feel free to type your questions in the chat as we go along, or unmuting yourself during the Q&A to share questions. Also, a brief survey will pop up after this webinar is completed. We appreciate your taking it in advance. It really helps us identify other webinar topics. To get us started, I'm going to post a poll in the chat so we get an idea who's here today, as well as what your engagement is with IPRA. So if you would go ahead and answer that poll, it would be greatly appreciated. All right, I see it is slowing down. I'll give it another second and then I'll end it. All right, there we go. So thank you very much for doing that. It's very helpful. And now, Kate, the floor is yours.
Awesome. So everybody see my screen? Yes. Welcome and thank you for joining our talk today. I'm Kate Lewis. I am the Associate Director in the Industry Alliances Office, and today we're going to talk about SBIRs and STTRs. If you have questions or comments throughout, please add them to the chat, or if you want to, you can raise your hand too. I'd love to have this to be a little bit more conversational. There's a lot of information in our slides, so if you have cases you want to talk about, that's fine too. And I'm on two different screens. If you see me looking this way, that's why. So if this is your first webinar, IPRA, the Intellectual Property and Industry Research Alliances Office, we help to establish contractual relationships to enable innovative research relationships with companies that includes industry-sponsored research and also technology licensing. We have Lale here from our licensing office if we have specific licensing questions as well. Okay, so the Small Business Innovation Research, that's SBIR, and the Small Business Tech Transfer, that's STTR. These programs are highly competitive programs, and they encourage domestic small businesses to engage in the federal research and development, R&D, with the potential for commercialization. The mission of the programs, these SBIR, STTR programs, is to support scientific excellence and technological innovation through the investment of federal research funds in critical American priorities to build a strong national economy. The SBIR STTR program is organized into three phases. The objective of phase one is to establish the technical merit, the feasibility, and the commercial potential of the proposed R&D efforts, and also to determine the quality of the team, to see if they can perform, see how they are at scaling, all of that stuff, prior to providing any further federal support in phase two. The phase one awards are generally in the 50 to 350K range, and they might be for 6 months or a year, depending on if it's SBIR or STTR. Um, the objective of phase two. So most programs you have to have a phase one before a phase two. There are certain programs like NSF has a fast track phase one and phase two, depending on where your technology is. The objective of phase two is to continue these R&D efforts that you initiated in phase one. The funding is based on the results um, that were achieved in phase one and the scientific and technical merit, and also the commercial potential of that project. Typically, only phase one awardees are eligible for phase two awards, and then they generally can be $750,000 or up to $1.2 million for 2 years. Phase three. So the objective of phase three, where it's appropriate, is for the small business to pursue commercialization objectives resulting from the phase two project. Um, Most SBIR STTR programs do not fund phase three. At some federal agencies, these phase three may involve follow-on non-SBIR STTR funded R&D or federal contracts like production contracts for products, processes, or services for use by the U.S. federal government. Uh, Federal agencies with extramural R&D, the research and development budgets that exceeded $100 million. This is historic data too. So they are required to allocate at least, or they're required to allocate 3.2% of their budget to fund of their R&D budget, extramural R&D budget to fund small businesses through these programs. Federal agencies with budgets that exceed 1 billion are also required to reserve 0.45% of this extramural R&D for the STTR program. Currently, 11 federal agencies participate in SBIR, and 5 of those also participate in STTR. Okay, so in order to be eligible for an SBIR STTR grant, you have to be an organized for-profit small business. You have to have a principal place of location, a business located in the United States. So the university cannot apply directly for SBIR STTR grants. They have to be applied to and awarded by a small business. They have to be more than 50% owned and controlled by one or more individuals who are citizens or permanent residents of the U.S. Um, and they have to have no more than 500 employees. Um, More than 50% of the salary. So this is for principal investigators. For the principal investigator of the SBIR or STTR small business, more than 50% of their salary has to be paid by the small business. So what that means is if we have a spin out startup coming out of Berkeley, that's somebody who's employed here, they will have to take either a partial leave of absence or leave of absence to be able to do the SBIR program through the small business. Um, you cannot have 100% employment, for example, at Berkeley and then try to do another 50%. The government will say that you can have no more than 49% employment elsewhere if you're going to be principal investigator. And then in terms of scoring criteria, um, they're looking at significance, innovation. They're looking at the investigator. They're looking at the team. They're looking at your approach, and they're also requiring that you have the desire to commercialize your research. So this is not basic science research. They're not funding projects that don't have a commercial potential. They're agnostic, specifically NSF is agnostic about what type of thing you're doing. You don't have to do it in medicine or AI or tech or anything like that. But it has to be something that you have an R&D project that is going to lead to a product that can be commercialized. So key differences, central to the STTR program is the partnership between a small business and a nonprofit research institution. That could be somebody like Berkeley, UC Berkeley as a university. It could also be an independent research institute like Gladstone Institute or even a hospital. And the STTR program requires the small business to formally collaborate with the research institution in both phase one and phase two. The STTR's most important role is to bridge that gap between the performance of basic science, the stuff that happens at the university, and the commercialization of resulting innovations. Um, for STTRs, depending on the agency, is depending on when this happens, but typically we submit a proposal to the small business. The small business would then submit the proposal to the federal agency. Once the federal agency has determined that they are interested in funding the project, they'll notify the small business, and at that point, we would enter into an intellectual property agreement, basically saying, anything that we're creating here at Berkeley is owned by Berkeley, but once this is awarded and we have a project, we're willing to offer a grant of a commercial license, negotiating that commercial license with that small business. For the SBIR program, it's not required that you partner with a nonprofit organization like it is for STTR. However, you're allowed to. In a lot of cases, it could be encouraged. It can strengthen your proposal, especially with a big player like UC Berkeley. But it's not required. And it's also not required in all phases. So what we've seen historically, we might have small businesses that submit and work on phase ones. They may um, have scientific advisors, but they don't subcontract to the university. And then when they get funded for phase two, then the university then becomes part of the project, and we do part of that work as well. So here we have a list, a public list of all our SBIR, STTR companies. We can put these in the chat too, so that's easy. I wanted to share the resource of Berkeley's Begin website. It's a great place to find entrepreneurship and startup communities. We also have a separate list of companies that are founded to commercialize UC's IP, UC Berkeley's IP, that have received SBIRs or STTR grants here. And then we've got a link here to find SBIR, STTR funding, deadlines, that kind of thing. You can also go to agency-specific websites. So you can search NSF, SBIR, and you'll be able to see when their funding deadlines are. NSF is on a rolling basis. They have deadlines every or 3 times a year. And then we have this new bullet point here at the bottom. We are collecting a list of faculty who are interested in partnering with a small business. So we, on occasion, have small businesses that come to our office, that come to IPRA, that are really interested in finding a PI to work with, or they just want to work with UC Berkeley. So if you are interested in putting your name on a list, that doesn't mean we're going to find somebody for you to work with, or that somebody who reaches out is going to be the right fit for you. But we're hoping to, keep us small, let's curate a list, and then if we get an inquiry, we'll look at that list, and then we'll contact you before giving your name away to the small business. So for anybody who's in here that's in a research administration role or an administration staff, do talk to your faculty about this too. I know we've had lots of interest with faculty who are interested but may not have the connections with some of the small businesses. So, and once you give us your name and email, then we can reach back out to you and get some potential topic areas that you're interested in, that kind of stuff. Okay, so we mentioned before that in order to be eligible for an SBIR, STTR, you have to be a small business. You have to be a for-profit. You have to have less than 500 people, and so on. And so UC Berkeley, we cannot participate as a prime awardee. We cannot directly apply. We're not a small business. However, we can participate as a sub-awardee. So that's the way that we would work with SBIR, STTR companies. At Berkeley, we need our PIs that serve here to have PI status, and it can be by exception so long as it's approved. And then importantly, that PI here serves as the Berkeley campus PI. That PI is not the PI of the whole project. It's not the PI of the company side. As we talked about before, the PI of the company side has to have at least 50% employment at the company, paid salary through this SBIR STTR grant. So in addition to that requirement, we might run into conflict of commitment and also conflict of interest. But most importantly, Berkeley, our PI is responsible for the conduct of research that Berkeley's doing. We're not responsible for the conduct of research that the company is doing. And if we had a situation where the Berkeley faculty was the PI, even though they're only working on the Berkeley side, then we could get into a situation where it might be implied that we're then responsible for the conduct of the whole research project, which we can't do. So that's important. This comes up periodically because there are companies that ask our PIs to be the main PI. Um, Very, very importantly, disclose any financial conflicts at the proposal stage. So we have agency requirements like NSF, NIH, DOE, and others that you're required to do. And we also have our state of California conflict of interest. That's through the 700U. If you have a conflict of interest with a small business, do disclose that right away and submit the addendum so that we can get that ready for review for when we get notified of potential funding. That's really important because sometimes that review process can take time. And we want to make sure that, especially for these really short projects, when we have some STTRs that are 3 to 6 months, that we're not causing delays because of our compliance work. So we want to make sure that we get that stuff as soon as possible, and then we can submit it and hopefully get that approved before we're done with the award. Um, if you're working with a defense agency, that is any Department of Defense, it could be the Office of Naval Research, Air Force, Army, Defense Threat Reduction Agency, Department of Defense themselves. If you're working with any of those defense agencies, do get your proposal in as soon as possible because oftentimes, I'd say 100% in my experience, but I won't say 100% because there probably are some cases where it's not true. But most of the time, those are funded under federal contracts. And those solicitations, the requests for proposals, RFPs, or the broad agency announcements, BAAs, may have terms and conditions in them that are not acceptable to the university. Remember that these programs are geared toward small businesses. And so if there's a small business that is trying to get into the defense contractor area, um, they are going to be able to accept things and may expect things that we can accept. And we'll go through some of those later, um, but some of those are publication restrictions or citizenship restrictions. And so those are things that we want to address as soon as possible. We have a 4-day review period for these. The earlier you get it to us, the more thoroughly we're going to be able to review these because we need to address these at the proposal stage before we get our proposal to the small business so that we can draft a letter that addresses the specifics of the RFP, saying what's allowable and what's not. There are sometimes carve-outs for universities and research institutes in the RFPs that have to be addressed at the proposal stage. So what that means is, and I think I'm talking about this later too, but what that means is basically the university operates under the fundamental research exemption. We conduct basic publishable research. We want to publish everything. We do not discriminate on the basis of citizenship. And so what the RFPs might say, what the solicitations might say is, if you're working with a research institution that operates under the fundamental research, then you need to fill out this form. If you fail to fill out this form, then we are not going to grant them an exception and all the terms apply. So I've seen that a handful of times, and that's something that we need to be able to have time to identify those. So just get it in early if you can. Um, and then finally, let us know if there's any UC background IP, or if there's been any university IP that's been licensed from your lab to the small business, because that helps us as well. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but if there's a link, Deborah, if you could put the link to the grant life cycle. Um, this is just a basic timeline of the grant life cycle process. So defining a project, finding funding, developing a proposal. That's that developing a proposal and submit proposal. As soon as you know you're going to be submitting these, you can get in touch with us. We're happy to have conversations with you with a small business in advance if that's helpful. Um, and then in that submit proposal to accept award, there often are steps for us as well. We mentioned the intellectual property management plan or an allocation of intellectual property rights that takes place between those two stages. And then managing the award, that's doing your project and then sharing your research out. Some important things to keep in mind. So indirect costs is a huge one. When do we offer discounts? The answer is never. We do not offer discounts on federal funding or industry funding. So these are kind of putting those two things together. Um, our negotiated indirect cost rate with the federal government is what is applied to all of these projects. And so if a company comes to you and says, hey, like, we don't want to pay this, then I'm happy to have a conversation. Folks in my office are happy to have a conversation with them and just talk about what these things are and what it actually means. Um, because we can't offer them a break on IDC. And then next, signing agreements. Who signs the agreements? Well, that's not faculty. That's not research. That's not research administrators. That's not other researchers. That is folks in Industry Alliance's office. So we will, at the proposal stage, review your proposal and provide a letter of commitment that has our signature on it. So we are signing, committing the university's resources to this project. At the award stage, we are the ones who will sign the contracts for any allocation of rights or intellectual property management plans. We negotiate and sign those for you. Um, Backing up a little bit, if there's a non-disclosure agreement or something that you or the company wants as you're developing the proposal, we also can help negotiate those and sign those for you. So we sign the agreements. Um, UC's patent policy, what are your obligations? So this comes in play for who owns the intellectual property that's developed. A lot of small businesses that we work with don't have a lot of experience with universities or working with universities in this way. And so a lot of times small businesses will want to own the intellectual property that's created by us. And under the patent policy, everything that you do in the performance of your job using university funding or using university resources is owned by the UC Regents. And we manage that intellectual property, and then we would be able to license. So your obligations here are you have assigned, you've already done it, any intellectual property that you've created or that you will create in the future to the university. And then your other obligation is to disclose. So if you do have an invention, to disclose to our Office of Technology Licensing. And Lale here is amazing and can help with that process too, answer questions, all of that. Proposal submission and award timelines. We have a 4-day policy on campus. So we want at least 4 days for proposal submission. If you have a grant, an SBIR grant, so that would be something typically coming from NSF or NIH. Those tend to be fairly straightforward. The 4 days is plenty of time for us to be able to receive it, review it, and get a commitment letter back to you. For Department of Defense and other solicitations where we anticipate a federal contract, the policy is still 4 days, but if you have more time leading up to that, then we would appreciate having more time with that as well, because those are more complicated and can have terms in them. Award timelines, it really depends. Some companies have a ton of experience. Some companies are SBIR and STTR companies. That's where they get a lot of their funding for their research projects. And some companies don't have any experience. And so award timelines can really vary. That example I just gave, NSF, NIH, we already know what the terms and conditions are for the federal side of it. And then we have templates for the subcontract side of it. So we are happy to work with the small business. We're happy to draft those agreements ourselves because oftentimes small businesses don't have access to those templates or they haven't done that before. So we're happy to do that. Those can go relatively quickly. When we add on federal contracting, then it can get a lot more complicated. And a lot of times we're still helping to draft those agreements or we're drafting those agreements for the small business. And basically for those, we have to go through every single clause that's in there. Sometimes there's just a list of the federal acquisition clauses called FAR clauses. We have to go through every single one and make sure it's applicable to the university. Is it something we can accept? Does the amount that we're receiving meet the minimum threshold? Is there an alternate for universities that's more appropriate? All of that. So that can take time. And so if you're receiving a federal contract, those are just going to those are just going to take more time. And then it's also the experience level of the person that we're negotiating with. Um, I know I've negotiated with people who haven't companies that haven't done a lot of these that their federal contract had citizenship restrictions, and so we needed them to go back to the federal agency and get an exemption for the university to have a fundamental research exemption so that we could be able to perform the research, basically carving out the part of the project that we're doing, um, and saying this is publishable, this is fundamental research. Everything that the company is doing, they can accept whatever terms they want to. We're not going to have access to their thing, but what we're doing is fundamental research. And they had a hard time with that because they had never gone through that process before. And they thought, well, we accepted the citizenship restriction, so you're going to have to also. For us, that's something we can never accept. For these types of projects, we can never accept that. So that for us would be a walk away unless we can figure out a way to move forward. And so after a lot of phone calls and stuff like that, we were able to move forward. But I'm guessing, in the future, and we actually have worked with them again, we submitted a second proposal to them for phase two. We included, and I put in my email to them, just a reminder to make sure we're getting that request up front. Put that in your proposal. We're working with UC Berkeley. We need to make sure that their research is classified as basic fundamental research so that there can be even a carve out in the award, the prime award, which would be amazing. So, and then, a lot of times companies also want things that we can't offer. So, especially small businesses that are inexperienced, they may want to own intellectual property. They may want to restrict our publications. Um, and so those are things that just may cause some delays as well. So negotiating these. So these are issued, like we said, as sub-grants or subcontracts. So sub-grants, that would be a sub-agreement under a grant. Under NSF, NIH, and others have standard terms and conditions. Like I said, those can be relatively straightforward, so long as we check off all of our compliance, like conflict of interest and things like that, within UC Berkeley. Subcontracts from defense agencies, though, NASA, sometimes Department of Energy, can have a lot more complicated terms. And here's just a list of some of them. We've kind of talked about some of them: publication restrictions, citizenship restrictions. They may deal with information that's controlled or export controlled or classified. And then this last thing is we need the fundamental research exemption, that what we're doing is basic fundamental research that we're publishing. And so these things are going to require a lot more interaction from my office to the PI and with the company, and we'll kind of figure out a way to move forward. Um, but yeah, it can cause some delays. Conflict of interest. So we briefly mentioned this before. The state of California disclosure 700U is always required. That's required for any time we're working with the business, for profit, small business like this, or anytime we're working with a business, and always. And then there's also the different agency specific requirements. So these are a few, they have their own policies. And so luckily in Phoebe, the initial screening questions for these are already built in. However, if there's yeses to those, then we'll need to collect those forms as well. And the conflict of interest website has a handy dandy chart on their webpage that deals with SBIR, STTRs, because it varies by agency and by phase of what's required at which stage. So definitely check that out. Um, we want all forms to be completed at the proposal stage. That includes the addendum and any additional forms that need to be completed for NIH, NSF, DOE, or others. That way we can have them and then we can submit them to the conflict of interest coordinators as soon as we get notified that there's going to be an award. This last bullet point, this is an NSF requirement, but it's also something that we restrict here on campus, that you cannot receive salary here at Berkeley if you also have a role in the small business. Basically, we're not wanting you to receive salary at both places, but this specifically is an NSF requirement that you can't receive salary if you have a role in that small business. Who we are happy to help. We're here. We can help you to meet with companies. We do this a lot, and it's just, helpful to get information to the companies of what our processes are, how things work. We're also happy to help you facilitate conversations with big companies, little companies, any other potential industry sponsor. Um, if you're interested in joining our list, then we're also happy to um, reach out to you if there's opportunities that we discover and you might be interested in. At any point, we can answer questions related to how we manage intellectual property. Um, that can be for your information, that can be for companies that you're working with. Happy to do all of that. And then, um, yeah, so this last one that where we do get approached by companies who want to partner. So in addition to giving us your name, if you're interested, also make sure your profile is up to date on the VCR expertise website. We often point small businesses to university resources like your webpage and this expertise website so that they can search and see and find and discover faculty on their own. They may just reach out to you on their own. Um, but yeah, so just a reminder to keep those updated. Here are things that we do not offer grant writing support. So we don't have grant writers within our organization. We're not providing business or business plan support or things like that. And we also don't have an entrepreneur boot camp within IPRA, however, or within IAO. However, we do have resources and we can send you references and resources on campus and then things, relationships we have off campus. Um, let's see. Yes. Okay, I think that's it. So are there any questions? I see are all these subawards or contracts. So they are all sub awards, so like sub agreement, sub awards, but they might be contracts or they might be grants. So they might be sub grants, subcontracts. It depends on what the prime award is. Um, does that answer the question? And I can take off my thing if anybody, let's see. I think that's it. Okay. I know we had some questions in the chat or in the form that we filled out in the beginning. So let me see if let's see. So the first question that we got in the form is how do persons with neurodivergent disabilities efficiently document project developments in SBIR contracts to best prepare for IP litigation if necessary? That's I don't think something that we would advise on. I think that would be something, and I don't know, Lala, if you have any input into that, besides regular documentation of your R&D efforts, keeping good lab notebooks, all of that stuff, and
Exactly.
voice memos, whatever works for you.
Exactly. Yes. It just, just as any inventor would do, please just record what you do, record your the time you believe you have invented something, or just keep good records, whether they are in personal writing or whether they are through the devices that might be of assistance to you for recording.
And also, I would add to that, it's good to disclose early as soon as you have something to disclose to our Office of Technology Licensing. That also helps us put a stake in the ground of when you develop that technology. Okay, the second question, how does the SBIR STTR process at UC Berkeley differ when compared to other universities? Um, I think that we're pretty well aligned with most universities. Um, the federal requirements are what they are. And so, that means that you have to be a small business, you have to be for profit, you have to have less than 500 people. That's going to be across the board for any university that's working with the small business SBI or STTR grant. So I'd say that we're fairly aligned. I think Berkeley definitely has transitioned to encouraging faculty to work with these projects, to work with small businesses, to promote regional economic development. I think these SBIR programs are really critical to the whole ecosystem. I think, maybe 15 years ago, maybe it was a little bit harder to get these through. I know the review processes were a lot more difficult. And I think that maybe that's gone away for us and it might exist still at other universities. What do we know about the reauthorization of SBIR program in fall of 2025? I don't have any information on that. So I think we're kind of in a wait and see situation. Um, there's a similar question. How are future SBIR grants affected by the new executive orders? I think we're in a wait and see. Thank you, Deborah, for putting that in the chat. Um, so yeah, I think we don't have any additional information other than what's available publicly. Okay. When applying for SBIR, are there any restrictions on the grant and hiring foreign employees in your small business? So if we go back, now rules may be changing. So, um, so the slide that I have here may be outdated. Let's see if you can see what I'm doing. Um, so it has to be more than 50% owned and controlled by one or more individuals who are citizens or permanent residents of the United States. Historically, there wasn't a restriction on having an employee, but I'm not sure what the future holds for that. This restriction is based on ownership and control. Which has a higher chance of proposal acceptance, SBIR, STTR. I really think it depends on what you're doing. So there are certain agencies that have you just apply to both. It's like you apply to SBIR, STTR, and then they kind of help you to select which they think is the more appropriate. I don't know about success rates necessarily, but I think it really just depends on is there university technology or is there technology that's being transferred and commercialized as the basis of the project? Um, yeah, so I'm not sure if and there could be, that's something we could look up, but yeah, I'm not sure. Let's see. So there's a question, how does working with a subcontractor affect my actual contract with my supervisor? What if I have to use my supervisor's facility for the subcontractor? Does this kind of work allow you to extend the visa? So the work that we're primarily talking about in the slide, so we've got two different bodies of work. We've got the small business side of it, and we have the university side of it. So in terms of the university side of it, if we are a subcontractor or a sub awardee to a small business, um, the funding actually comes through the university and would come through a principal investigator who would then be overseeing the project for the graduate student. So in terms of how does a subcontract affect a contract or affect the supervisor relationship, I mean, it would be the same as other types of sponsored research. Um, from the uh, if from the SBIR small business side, I think that's something that would have to be managed if there's, let's say, a graduate student who has a small business and then wanted to subcontract part of that back to the lab that they work in, that we would manage that at that time. Um, and then in terms of use of facilities, we do have a program on campus. Deborah, could you put in a link to the Rick Flexi program? So we do have a process that, in terms of using university facilities that a small business can apply for, and then we can explore that and kind of go through those steps and answer those questions to see if that's something that's appropriate. And then in terms of this kind of work allow you to extend a visa. So I'm not sure. I wouldn't want to comment on any immigration requirements. I'm not sure. But I'll just say that work coming into the university is going to be a typical contracting grant for us. We don't put these SBI or STTR grants in a special category. These are federal funds that are flowing through a small business. And so the same rules and benefits and cost principles are going to apply as to other federal projects. Let's see. Okay, this question may be too specific. I am the director for Core Analytical Lab on campus and I have an external customer via IPRA's RIC program. Okay. Yeah, so I think this one would be better if we consulted with Mike Cohen in our licensing office. He works with the RIC Flexi program. So I think we would want to answer that kind of on a case-by-case basis with more information. Lolly, I don't know if you have any input. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, 1 second. I'm trying to SBIR to the NIH and inquired about listing a lab as a facility. What are the limitations? Can they list facility? I'm not sure that you can list the facility or equipment or staff as technical support. But you can submit your biosketches, yes.
Are there other questions? I think the rest of the questions we had from the registration were just kind of specific about what people were interested in learning. Yeah, I mean, if there's no more questions, we're happy to wrap up. My email, it was on the final page. I can pull that up again. And then I can turn it back over to Andrea.
Great. Thank you, Kate. That was incredibly thorough and very helpful. And also, Deborah, you're providing the links is amazing. So between the two of you, this has been a great tag teaming experience. To all our participants, thank you for joining us today. And don't hesitate to reach out to IPRA at any time. You can also find our contact information on the IPRA website under team. And if you would please complete the short survey to help us identify future topics. So with that, I will say enjoy the rest of your afternoon and thank you.